Yeah.
Pretty good, yes.
All right, thank you all for attending. This is the 2015 edition of CARD, Computer Architecture Research Directions. My name is Derek Chu. My co-organizers are Josh Yee and Reza Sende, who are sitting up front here. Today we have three great panels. Basically, these are mini panels. These are really debates. So one of the things that Josh, Reza, and I were talking about it in HPC area a long time ago was that we would see people give a talk, and then we'd see the author, go and huddle up with a couple of other senior people. And they'd be obviously discussing something very important about the paper that was just given. And the rest of us couldn't see it and hear that. So now what we're trying to do is we're essentially letting them have this open discussion, letting them discuss a specific topic of great interest to us, and having it completely out in the open. So that's the intention of these panels. So the first panel will be moderated by Mark Hill. He's the chairman of the CS department at University of Wisconsin, and he told me he still has tenure. So.
All right, thank you, Derek. And so if anyone wants to know about the great things happening at Wisconsin Computer Science, come and talk to me afterward. So normally, keep coming in. Normally a moderator should be conflict-free. In my case, I am conflict-full. Dave Patterson co-advised my PhD with Alan Smith, and I currently consult for AMD, where Dave Christie has worked for decades. So think of it as balanced, mutually assured destruction for conference. Both debaters have decades-long experience designing and implementing instruction sets in industry and academia. By the way, a really fast way to get biographies written for people is write it for them first, and they come back with corrections really fast, but it's always longer. So Dave Christie first worked for CDC, I don't know how many of you remember that company, implementing the last gasp of the 6600 ISA and the first gasp of its successor CISC ISA. But he moved to AMD in the late 1980s as he saw that microprocessors would replace big iron computers, which I think was pretty prescient. His CDC experience made him a huge fan of the RISC philosophy, and he subsequently worked on both superscalar and microcontroller variants of the AMD 29000. Anyone hear that? Which was a very early RISC machine. Then, go figure, he spent 2 decades contributing to virtually all of AMD's many generations of x86 processors. Athlon, Opteron, on and on. Starting with the microcode of the first superscalar x86 designed independently from Intel, which was called the K5. He's also known for code-defining x86-64, which are the 64-bit extensions to x86, first for AMD and indirectly for Intel. He most recently switched hats, and he's serving as AMD's ARM architecture liaison, interpreting the ARM ISCA scrolls for their ARM core design efforts and the common x86 ARM system-on-a-chip infrastructure in his role as senior AMD fellow. Not surprisingly, Christie will argue for proprietary instruction sets. Did we state the name of this debate, by the way? This is proprietary versus open source instruction sets. All right. David Patterson is the Pardee Professor, it's spelled with 2 E's, and not T-Y, of Computer Sciences, where he joined after graduating from UCLA in 1976. Most pertinent to this debate, Patterson and Carlos Saikin in the 1980s did work that coined the RISC term, reduced instruction set computers, to characterize ISAs that he and others were advocating as non-microcode alternatives to the prevailing CISC complex instruction set computers. In my humble opinion, this work influenced at least the microarchitecture of most computers today. He spent a sabbatical at DEC in 1979 working on the VAX mini computer, which I perhaps had some reason why RISC seemed like a good idea. He then consulted for Intel for a few years on microprocessors, and later became the first person hired by Sun Microsystems to develop the SPARC architecture. and he subsequently consulted for Sun for 25 years. More recently, Christy Osanovic Patterson and collaborators have designed a open source RISC-V, or is it RISC-V? RISC-V ISA, initially to support computer architecture research and education, but to their surprise, there's a growing following in the industry as well. And I forgot to mention he's produced some brilliant students. Not surprisingly, Patterson will argue for open source instruction sets. Okay, so the format of this debate is as follows. This was an approximately 5-minute opening statement. Dave Christie and then Dave Patterson will give 10-minute opening statements each. This will be followed up with up to 10 minutes of questions among the three of us, and then I will open it up to the audience for questions. So with that, Dave Christie, and Dave Patterson's going to move down so he can see Dave Christie's slides.
Go darts. Okay, the case for Proprietary ISA. Why are they here to stay? I worked for AMD for a long time. In this capacity, I'm speaking only for myself, mainly because nobody at AMD has reviewed these slides. So,
Oh, you're from AMD.
So I had a little bit of trouble coming up with a good title for this. I have a few I'm going to try on for size with you guys. Maybe you can help me decide what the best one was, although I think I know where I'm ultimately going to go with this. So that's the first one. Not sure about that one. That's getting closer, maybe. Oh, how did that get?
Really armed and evolved by
Thanks. Not quite what I was going for. I think we're just about done. Again, there might be some interesting analogies there, and so I think ultimately, with reference to my esteemed colleague or esteemed co-panelist's reputation, I kind of altered that classic quote. And so, let's see, just before going on, I want to add a couple more things. My trip today. I left Boston this morning in thunderstorms, rainy weather, but just before we left, there was this gorgeous rainbow that appeared before we taxied out to the runway. And then as we were flying up to Dallas, I could see it again out my window, another rainbow. And yet further on, there was rainbow again, and it struck me. We're literally chasing rainbows. Wow, an apt analogy for this discussion for somebody. And then flying into Portland, right past Mount St. Helens, gorgeous view, such a huge mountain. And I couldn't help but wonder if at some point it was maybe a molehill. So, proprietary ISAs. Let's have a look. So, they have provided very effective de facto standards. None of them, I think, set out, maybe some of them, well, none of them really, the ones that are really the mainstream ones. Try to be a standard, certainly not the way that RISC-V intends to. But they've been very effective as standards. And as such, the evolution has been very carefully considered. And I know Dave may have a thing or two to say about that. But really, and maybe early on for some of them, maybe not so much, everybody I think the evolution of ISA has been the story of, to some extent, seemed like a good idea at the time. And I'm sure that's going to be true with RISC-V. We just haven't gotten old enough yet. So, but the owners of these ISAs, especially more recently, in the past decade, couple of decades, certainly they're commercial entities, they have customer bases and need to be responsive to the needs of customer bases. At least some of them do. There may be one that kind of tends to ram things down people's throat, nameless. But largely they have to do stuff that makes sense, and that's going to be accepted. And it's not so much the quality, the inherent goodness of the ISA, but these ISAs have over success. It's really many things. It's marketing, it's being in the right place at the right time, an element of chance. Certainly. So it's a variety of things that make an ISA what it ultimately becomes and how successful it ultimately becomes. They're not perfect, but the real world, there's a lot of world full of trade-offs that just come into play that sometimes get in the way of ISA goodness. But ideally, it's not that big a deal. You're not, peak efficiency isn't always at the top of the list. And they have huge ecosystems supporting them, which makes them pretty formidable. Intel tried to kill off x86, and we all know how well that went. So RISC-V, let's have a look at that. I've had a look at the specs, and then my due diligence to some extent. Clearly, I did Times op-ed a couple years ago, and downloaded the specs and then looked through those. And it's not bad. It's interesting. It's a decent effort. The premise and the rationale are not totally out of line. They've learned, certainly put to good use good lessons from the past. Including base plus extensions concept. I've seen suggestions that that's a new invention with RISC-V, which I take issue with, certainly. x86 has had extensions for a long time that are software visible. ID bits to say whether or not an extension is present, it may or may not be present. Extensions have been removed using those bits. And clean design, yeah, pretty much, sure. These guys know what they're doing. There seems to be a recognition of the required effort that it takes to really get something out there for it to be successful. It's not going to happen overnight. It's recognized it's going to take a lot of work. It'll be slow. That's all goodness. And it looks like a lot of fun. And I get that. It is a lot of fun designing an ISA. You don't get to do it all that often. It's even more fun when it actually gets put into wide use. And it's even more fun when 500-pound gorilla is forced to swallow it. So what are the holes in it? So I only have a limited amount of time here, so let's see. Oh, let's see, did I go? All right, I'm a little too far. So the need for it, I think, I looked at some of the, I've seen comments that others have made as well. It seems a little bit questionable. We have, there's open risk as an effort, kind of similar. People have questioned, why not just work with that instead? As far as open source, ISA, and processor design, it's Lattice Pico 32. 32-bit RISC processor that people can take. It's open, it's free. Industry all ties. People have used it in industry. We've used it ourselves as a microcontroller in some of our SoCs. Why haven't, have to ask yourself, why haven't these become widely accepted and viewed as the way to go and juggernauts and competitive and displacing ARM and x86? And maybe they have in certain embedded areas. You can use an ARM M3 or maybe an LM32 or an open RISC. I was looking through the spec and I noticed in discussion about the various instruction set flavors, there was mention of VLIW. And I thought, really? I guess that's an option for having kind of a VLIW flavor, which got me thinking that maybe it's gone a little bit too far, a little bit too academic, it's going to be too perfect, it's going to be too many things to too many people, jack of all trades. That kind of worried me. Maybe that isn't being seriously considered. Maybe it would have its place, sure. But it kind of got me wondering. And shared open core design, shortened time to market. I can't remember where I saw that, maybe it was in comments in the forum or something. I believe it was from Dave. Which I don't know, that's not obvious to me that having a library of open source designs that you can pick from, I don't know if that's any faster from licensing an M3 core from ARM. There's a question of money. Also, I think the ISA these days is less and less prominent. It's maybe, certainly for the mainstream ones to some extent, maybe it's just a checklist item. Gotta be x86 compatible, gotta be ARM compatible. Our whole software stack relies on that.
10 minutes.
Seriously?
Get another minute, but.
Okay, so it's just another it's another interface layer among many. It's becoming less and less visible as more and more software layers. Nobody programs in assembler these days. There's very little software that deals directly with the ISA. A better approach, in my mind, CPU is not the only programmable hardware. We got accelerators now coming out, GPUs. The optimal implementation, in my mind, of various high-level functions is best done with custom hardware ISAs, best suited to it. In the proper place to standardize, the software machine interface is with a virtual ISA or intermediate language. Which brings me to, even though I'm not speaking for AMD, HSA and HSAIL is an example, great example of that approach. HSA is a heterogeneous system architecture started by AMD. There's a foundation for that. It's nonprofit. It's open. There are many members, ARM, other industry members or academic members. It has as its target language, its target ISA, HSAIL. HSA intermediate language. It's designed to support GPU and CPU. Compilers target HSAIL, and then ISA providers provide a finalizer that does the translation. It can be a build time, it can be a runtime to translate to the hardware ISA. Compilers pass on optimization info so that an intelligent job can be done at optimization at the low level at runtime. It directs, runtime can direct execution to the most appropriate resource in a given system at the runtime, its core GPU. And it's in place now for x86 and I think ARM at AMD GPUs. We're certainly on the way and expected to be applied to DSPs and all kinds of other accelerators.
Whistle is such a great idea. I've never had a chance to whistle my PhD advisor. I double dare you, Dave.
And you never will. Okay, I think this is your water.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay, I'm starting now. So just make sure I say it now. If you want to see real chips at RISC-V, we've done 8 or 10 of them at Berkeley in the last 4 years with RISC-V. There'll be a talk 20 minutes after this, 250 and 131. And if you want to find out more RISC-V, you can come to the workshop at the end of the month at Berkeley. It's free academics. So we live in a remarkable world. We live in a remarkable world where open source standards, and open source implementations of those standards really work. They're all over everywhere. Our whole field depends upon it, except one field, which is ours. So why not? Why isn't there free and open standards and open implementations like the rest? And like Dave said, instruction sets don't matter that much, right? The performance is really the algorithms and the software above that interface or the hardware below it is what matters more than the I/O devices. But instruction sets do matter. It's the most important interface in a computer system. It's where the hardware meets the software. Most of the cost in developing a new chip is porting software to it. And most new chips, including AMDs, have lots of instruction sets on them, not just the ones you know about. The application's instruction set, but there's instruction sets for graphics and image processors, radio and audio DSPs, security processors, and so on. And these are all kind of ad hoc instruction sets that have been created over the time and have their own little software stack associated with them. So if the instruction set doesn't matter that much for the energy and performance, and it costs a lot to use different ones, why don't we have one free open standard that anyone can use for everything, right? Why not? And we think there's no technical reason for that. There's historical and proprietary reasons, but technically it could happen, just like all the other fields. It's not that AMD and Intel forgot to make it open, right? They hired lawyers that will sue you if you violate their licenses. And it's not because they do most of the software development. They do very little of it. In fact, these companies love open source software. It's the hardware open source that I'm not so sure about. And it doesn't take one of these companies to design an instruction set. Lots of people who come to this conference can do an instruction set. It takes a lot of effort, but it can be done. And they're not like they're wonderful instruction sets. It's not, wow, this is what architecture is. They work. They're successful. And it doesn't take a company to verify instruction sets. Standards like wireless standards, floating point standards, those are pretty hard. This is a pretty well specified interface. And it doesn't even protect you from lawsuits. NVIDIA thinks the Imagination and ARM GPUs violate their patents, but they're not suing them. They're suing Qualcomm for using their IP, and then they're suing Samsung for using Qualcomm chips. And finally, they're not guaranteed to last. You're tied to the fortunes of the company. When DEC went out of business, it took the VAX instruction set and IALPA instruction set down with it. What would be the benefits? Greater innovation, because a lot more people get to design them just than those working for companies, both open and closed ones. To have open cores, if we're going to be like the other fields where we can share implementation, we have to have a free and open instruction set. We can't do a proprietary one. I believe absolutely it would be shorter time to market if we shared the cores. And if you don't have to design it yourself, it should be less expensive. Fewer errors because more people are looking at the designs. And in this modern world where you're afraid that some government agency has stuck something in your chip, you got a better chance of discovering it if the RTL itself, everybody can look at it. This will make things cheaper, which you need for Internet of Things, where things cost less than $1. And for those of us in academia, like our colleagues in operating systems, like our colleagues in compilers, the stuff we do can be industrial strength that many people can see. And educationally, they won't run into these proprietary limits. And the low-risk effort in Cambridge is trying to make a system on a chip that has no IP on it, is using RISC-V. So, as Dave suggested, why is this happening now? I think it's happening now because Moore's law is ending. So cost performance isn't coming from the semiconductor manufacturers, it's coming from architectural innovation. A lot of people believe we're going to see a renaissance in domain-specific coprocessors like GPUs, DSPs, image processors, and so on. And so what do we want? We don't want everybody to invent their own instruction set. We want them to use some standard-based, amenable, open, unencumbered instruction set that you run all the standard software and you can add your coprocessors to. So I think the reason this is happening now is we're at this bifurcation in computer architecture history. 20th century architecture, the instruction set is bundled in the hardware. So Intel designs the instruction set and gives you the chip. So that means that microprocessor has to run anything. So it can't shrink. It's going to gain gain instructions like you gain weight as you get older. So I call these monolithic microprocessors, and x86 has demonstrated that, right? 2 instructions a month for 40 years. It goes up into the right. This new world in the 21st century, the instruction set is IP intended for an SoC. So this SoC will normally customize to the application. It knows what software is running in. So I'll call this a minimal modular instruction set. An example of that is RISC-V. It has the minimal instructions, less than 50 of them, and has for 3 different address sizes. And then if you want these extensions, you add multiply, divide, atomic, single, double, and quad, and compressed instructions if you want smaller sizes. This is different from the x86 in that the software runs just on the base. And then as you add them or subtract them, the rest of the software will work. And then there's space set aside for the SoC instructions and fit the standard instruction set. I've given you copies of the RISC-V green card. So the leftmost column here is the less than 50 base instructions for a 32-bit address space. That'll run everything. If you want to add multiply and divide, that adds another 8 instructions for that. If you want to add atomics, there's another 11 instructions for that. If you need the floating point one, there's 34 for that. And if you want to run smaller programs, there's 31 for that. And that's all of the options we define for the base address. For 64-bit addressing, you need to add a little bit more instructions for that rather than just wiring registers, and we even have defined 128 addressing. Dave suggested some of these other things that failed. Like 20 years ago, Sun did an open version of Spark, and 15 years ago, the people did the one based on Deluxe. Why haven't they caught on? They were just too early. They were in the monolithic microprocessor era. There wasn't a business need for it. It's this minimal modular IP era that needs it. Dave, in his statement, said there's been good stewardship by the proprietary ISIS. Boy, that's not what I think. You forget that 10 years ago, Intel tried to foist the Itanium architecture on everybody in the field. They were holding the 32-bit instruction set captive, and you had to go to Itanium. The only reason it didn't work is because rarely for a proprietary instruction set, there was a second source to build it. And Dave was one of the guys who made this alternative. Nevertheless, the industry wasted billions of dollars. Companies went out of business because Intel tried to force them to use this other instruction set architecture. ARM's doing the same thing right now. It's forcing you to use the V8 instruction set. There's no second source with the 64-bit ARM v7. And now this V8 instruction set, which I've spent a lot of time with, is gigantic, but it's still missing things. For example, they didn't have 16-bit instructions, so their code size is bigger, bigger than x86. And what's this mean? Higher cache miss rates. So in fact, their current cores are made a bigger instruction cache to hide some of that evidence. So when I say it's gigantic, I don't know how to capture that. RISC architectures typically have 1 or 2 addressing modes. This one has 8. It has more than 1,000 instructions, right? But the most impressive thing is the manual. It's the biggest manual in the world. 54, if you printed it out, it would be as tall as this podium. 5,400 pages in a manual. It's the world's biggest RISC architecture and manual. So if you'd like to learn more about RISC-V, there's this workshop at 250. We've done 8 implementations that work and run fast. Sign up at riscv.org. We have one workshop in Monterey that was sold out with 150 people from 50 organizations. We're going to do one at the end of this month. It's free to academics. I don't know if you work for one of the companies, it's one of our sponsors. It'll probably sell out too, so sign up. So let me wrap up my argument for free and open instruction sets. Given the consensus on instruction set principles, which surprisingly we have reached, there's no good technical reason not to be like all the other fields and have a free and open instruction set standard. It'll allow this open source ecosystem. Lots of people can build it, not just a few companies. More innovation from more designers and more reuse. And if we're going to do that, what instruction set we should pick? We should pick one designed for this 21st century. It should be free and open. It should be minimal because a lot of the innovation will come from the core, co-processors, not the cores. We got to have the full stack of software running on it, and that comes across on the minimal one. And then have this modularity where you have the standard and options that you need, and then space for this word set for the unique ones. And then finally, our goal is not shy. Right? Our modest goal here is to become the industrial standard instruction set for everything. So, thank you.
How did you do that? You were 10 seconds from me being able to blow the whistle.
I told you it would work with you. All right, you're going to sit there. I'll sit. Okay. Okay.
I would move over because otherwise people can't see.
This way? Okay.
Okay, so this next part of the debate is where we'll talk a little bit among ourselves and see how that goes, and then we'll open it up to the audience. And so I'm going to start with a question for each. So first of all, to Dave Christie. So you could argue that the ARM ISA you had no initial ecosystem, and it started out as a response to x86's very closed ecosystem. And now ARM has a flourishing ecosystem with different goals in x86, but it's still semi-closed. So why shouldn't an open source architecture start, a third open ecosystem, and we shouldn't get going on it?
I have no reason at all. Let's have at it. Sure.
Okay, so then what is the rationale for?
Well, I don't think there's, I don't think there's the commercial pull for it that Dave seems to think there is. I don't know. Sure, there's a plethora of smaller companies and it's got a big fan club.
Do I get to
Yeah, you can respond after he does.
I don't know, maybe in time, but certainly worth taking a shot at it. No harm in that.
Yeah, so I think if there was no open source software and the first people to try that was us, there's a lot of reason to be skeptical. But when Linux started, it didn't have an ecosystem, right? And it's remarkably, it caught on with companies and they poured resources in. So I think there's a chance we're at this early era. Obviously, this is like the innovator's dilemma, right? It's incomplete, it's very promising, but it doesn't have everything you need. In this open source world, we think volunteers will help, amazingly enough, and help supply and build that ecosystem. That's our bet, right? That's why we're wearing these shirts. We bet when we come back in 5 years, this is going to be a significant force, but we'll see, time will tell.
Do you want to respond to that?
You may be right. Great reference to the innovator's dilemma. Yeah, that's exactly how things often happen, and this could be a case study in that.
So, I guess one other reason why this might fail is if you feel that the ARM ecosystem is sufficiently open to enable the SoCs, the systems on a chip. Would you say that's the case?
It certainly seems to me that there's so many players in the ARM ecosystem in terms of tools. You can buy instruction set simulators from a variety of people for program development, debug tools for silicon from a variety of companies. It's a huge, that's one of the first things that struck me when I first started working with ARM, was going to their annual conference, industry conference that they have, show and tell for a lot of their partners and whatnot for tools. And it really strikes you just how big it is and how much there is. And a lot of people who, this shared development of the ecosystem and shared cost of tool development, pretty big customer base, rather than doing stuff in-house, for example.
So Dave, do you think ARM is open enough?
No, they have not defined a coprocessor interface in that architecture. And a lot of people in this room believe that coprocessors are the future of architecture. I think ARM wants to supply all the coprocessors you ever want from them, as opposed to making it open. So that's a glaring omission. ARM is a great company if what you are building right now fits, you can afford it. But it's documented. ARM says it takes 6 months to 2 years to negotiate a contract with ARM. So for a lot of small companies, this is a real problem, and they don't even want to do business with a lot of companies unless you're going to have volume. So they're kind of a monopoly, and they get to pick who wants to work with them. They're not as open to business as I would have thought, right? And they've as well as providing an instruction set and ecosystem, they're there to make money, and why wouldn't they have a coprocessor interface? There's business reasons for that, but I don't see technical reasons. 6
months to 2 years to
for the
license the core from them, or to license the ISA, the right to build?
No, just the core. If you go into them, this is what a columnist went and visited them, and they told them it takes because when you say, okay, you want this core versus that core, how many cores do you want? And they say it's as little as 6 months and as much as 2 years before you strike the business agreement. Now, once you've struck that business agreement, then you just only have to pay them for it.
I don't know. I can't really comment on that, not having made those
I'll go,
negotiations myself. I'm skeptical.
All right,
it seems like a terrible way to do business.
Yeah, I agree with that.
They've gotten
We
so
have
successful.
citations. I'll show you the columns.
The coprocessor argument, the ARM-v7 has this coprocessor, at least in the ISA interface, which they did away with because it really wasn't put to any use except for mapping system registers into various functions. Why doesn't,
The
as
V8
far as
doesn't
talking
do that.
coprocessors go, memory mapped?
Well, you know, there's things you can do,
Access.
yeah, memory map works for some things, but there's you wouldn't want to do floating point that way, right? So
No.
there's things that you'd rather have closer to the processor.
Don't do floating point as a,
Okay, all right, enough on that question. All right, so now I have another question to start with Dave Patterson. So let me pretend by assumption that open ISAs are a good idea, your position. So it is obviously true that you need large ecosystems to make this work. So how does one develop an ecosystem for a new open architecture? And what are the incentives for the various parties to participate? I mean, given that hardware beneath the interface is different than software, right? You can't just replicate it for free, you have to fabricate it.
Well, the incentives are similar to the incentives for open source, all the open source software systems. Right? Is you can participate in the design and evolution of those systems. Or, you know, that's a choice. You can buy the proprietary system, get the solutions from ARM, or there's advantages to being able to help shape what the future's going to look like, both the instruction set and the implementations. In terms of getting it started, I think, you know, Berkeley's trying to get this off the ground. We're launching a foundation that, you know, we hope will have the first members at the workshop, so it's not just a Berkeley effort, so, you know, the people, and this is typically what open source efforts do. And we think, you know, that the missing pieces will be attractive to people to help build, and it's the kind of the faith in open source systems, and we think it will apply to hardware as well. I think a lot of people are frustrated by dealing, you know, with ARM. It's, you know, it's kind of a monopoly right now, and you know, I think it'd be beneficial, just like I think it's beneficial in operating systems compilers. There's open ones and closed ones. I think it'd be good for our field if there was an open version that might temper some of the behavior of companies who think they have monopolies and that they're the only choices in town. So I think it'd be good, it'd be healthy for our field if there was an open source one.
Dave Christie, how do we, if you wanted to do this, how would you develop an ecosystem as quickly as possible?
oh. Make a lot of friends in the open source community to start with. There's certainly a lot to be said for open source, no argument there. I just don't see the need for, open source ISA. But to build the ecosystem, it's not. Remember, it's not just the tools. It's critical mass. It's critical volume of implementations and software support, and people knowing that they can write applications for these processors, if they're going to be mainstream processors, that it's worthwhile investing the money into compiling and debugging your application because there will be enough of a market for it. Reaching that kind of critical mass is somewhat less tangible, I think. That's where you need marketing, luck, and good tools, certainly.
Couldn't you have said the same thing about ARM when they started? This is crazy, they could never take on the existing players.
It's taken a long time. It's been a long, slow climb for ARM. I don't know. I don't even know. I can't remember when it started.
It's 1985.
Yeah, and it's to get to the point where they are now. It's been a long slog.
Dave, you want to make a comment or move on?
Move on.
All right, so you two now have a chance to ask each other a question, if you want, or we can open it up to the audience.
I've got one.
Okay.
Just the notion of all these people designing cores. That's one area where I'm not sure just how big the market is for people really wanting to design their own cores. A lot of people who want to design systems, design an SoC to implement a particular function like a set-top box or a TV or who knows what, aren't necessarily keen on designing the host processor or even any of the microcontrollers that provide various functions in power management or whatever. They're quite happy. They've got, all they can deal with is to assemble the ISA or the SoC functionality that they need for the product. In Vision, they're quite happy to use whatever ISA, whatever processor implementation they can get their hands on. So there's, I think, a limited appeal for people wanting to design those cores, and I response would be, but there are a lot of people who will design those cores and make them available. There would be libraries in some form of cores that are fully verified, there may be hardened versions. There may be some financial backing for some of that, and companies like Red Hat, for-profit companies who work with the open source world in a very effective way, like this happened with Linux, in providing and supporting these cores. So I imagine that's a part of the ecosystem that you can see developing. I guess that could happen, but I'm kind of thinking of the analogy that came to mind was the Russian supermarket versus the American supermarket. We don't want the Russian supermarket. The American supermarket seems to be kind of excessive at times. Boggles my brain. The selection just seems to be overkill. And I don't know that I kind of wonder just what the demand is for a wide variety of different cores. How many cores does an SoC or a PV vendor or whatever designer want to be able to choose from?
Well,
5, maybe 15, no.
Let's see. I think in the open source community, a lot of the software gets done. Some of the software gets done in academia, right? Some of the implementations are done by students and faculty. I think that would be, in terms of who would want to design them, I could imagine that would be a source of places. I believe ARM has either somewhere between 10 and 15 licenses. Companies have spent a lot of money to have the right to design their own cores. I think it's 10 or 15. So there's at least 10 or 15 companies that want to design ARM cores, even though they can get one directly from ARM. For the low-end designs, the high-end stuff that like you guys do, that's really, that's rocket science, right? But there's a lot of, I think the opportunities for us is going to be in the Internet of Things. So we're talking about really amazingly energy efficient, amazingly small things that are 0.01 milliliters. There might be a lot of innovation there that a lot of people could do. So I can imagine many people might be building cores there.
Okay, so I think with that, let's open it up to the audience. Now, my understanding is that this is being recorded and there's no mic to go around. And so I will have to repeat your question. So you should state your name and affiliation in a succinct question, otherwise I will get it wrong. Andy Blue, somewhere.
Andy Blue at MITS right now, and obviously I've worked at companies. We're in another company selling a proprietary ISA. But I'm actually in love with the idea of open source ISAs and frankly open source IP cores. I hope that at some point, you can pull something off.
Andy Blue in love with open source ISAs.
And RTL. But my fear is this. First statement, I only want you to repeat the latter part of this, Mark. Unix killed off operating system development for 20 years. And we've seen that, I think the same thing has happened in, say, office software development. What happened in office software development, now you can't get new features in open office because there's very little innovation there. And you can't get stuff that will run on the Oregon coast where I don't get cellular connections. All the innovation in in office software is on websites where you pay to get by ads. And I'm a little bit worried that there might be something like that happening with open source ISAs or more likely open source RTL. That I'm not quite sure what an ad from your RTL would look like, but I am quite sure what an information leak leaking to your friendly neighborhood NSA would look like. And I'm afraid that might be the sort of thing that happens with this. You change the business model.
I'm looking for your summary.
So Andy's concerned that...
Let me just say, I'm a little bit worried that open source ISA and open source CPU cores will change the business model, possibly killing innovation in much the same way that open office software has killed innovation.
Okay, let's go with that. All right. So there's a concern that you make things open source and that can kill innovation. as it is done, for example, in Office software?
Wow. I guess
Right now, to innovate in cores, you have to work for a couple of companies right now. There's only a couple of companies allowed. Let's try the experiment.
We're number 3.
Okay, go ahead. Let's try the experiment where we let a lot more people design cores. I think what's interesting, especially over my career, is the agreement on instruction set design, right? I think, a lot of stuff we tried over the decades didn't work out so well. So kind of the risk stuff still seems like a pretty good idea. So I don't know that we need a lot of innovation in instruction set design now. I think for cores, it's wide open, right? We're, Moore's law slowing down, energy being important, these $1 chip things. I think that's a vast space. It's hard for me to see. I think this will enable innovation because most architects, they'll do something on their own and they'll try and port software with it and nothing will run and take some years, right? Here, you do the base, you can run Linux, you got all these compilers running, and then you can innovate in the things you want to do, innovate underneath the instruction set, and you got a big piece of software that's going to run. I'm willing to take bets, but boy, I think if it works, we're going to see a lot more innovation than, right now we got to get everything for the ARM instruction set. Basically, almost everybody in the world has to get their cores from ARM. They're designed at one company, and they would come at our talk, Yunsup's talk at 250, and see the cores that we designed at Berkeley, just this one group at Berkeley, and how we designed better cores than ARM. We'll show you the data.
Dave Christie, you want to comment?
I think that's an interesting observation from Andy, that it could, right now, we've got a huge fan club, a lot of very smart people participating in the effort. They'll do really cool things. But over time, things kind of go, the people that had fun initially will often do other things. Businesses will be built around it that kind of set certain constraints and things get mired down.
So don't do anything, is that?
No, I do worry that the innovation will certainly happen now, might taper off.
Okay.
All right, next succinct question.
From the audience.
Hi, I'm Don Gray, an independent consultant. I know with RISC-V, if I want to experiment with transactional memory or new security models or new memory systems, I can see how I can build those on that infrastructure. In the legacy compatible ISA ecosystem, how does a researcher experiment with these new innovations in ISA and get uptake?
So the question was, in an open source situation, if you want to experiment with things like transactional memory or security, this can be done. But how would you do that in the proprietary ecosystems? So I think Dave Christie first.
Okay, first of all, for transactional, if you have ideas of how transactional memory will work in RISC-V, they might be interested in talking to you. I noticed that's a blank chapter in the spec, a TBD, which I don't fault them for. There has been tons of work in transactional memory in academia, and proposals. I used to be fairly active in that area, but I haven't been for a couple of years, and things are escaping me. But there's been no shortage of the ability to experiment and develop transactional capabilities that can be adopted by any ISA, pretty much, I think. I don't think that's been a problem.
What we're doing in extensions, we're doing extensions where we think there's consensus in the architecture community. There's no consensus on transactional memory yet. That's why we put a placeholder in the chapter in there. But we think we need to make more progress to figure out what to do, and then once we do, we'll have a place to do it. I agree with the questioner that this is an opportunity to do significant stuff where you can build chips and run software and try things out. We'll give you an ecosystem RTL that you can start modifying, and then do your experiments. I think particularly security. Security's been done mostly by pointing out flaws rather than building things and see if they work. You could take RISC-V, you could try your idea, you could build a system, initially from FPGAs and try it out. Put it on the internet, claim it's going to work. You can't do that. I think ARM would sue you. You get sued if you try to do that with ARM. So you can't use the proprietary instruction sets to do things. And ARM seems to believe in security by obscurity. And no security researcher that I know of thinks that. They think their best path forward, everybody knows what's going on, and then you try and break into it. And with what we're doing, you can do that, right? You can put your RTL out there, you can put your ideas out there, you can share them, everybody doesn't have to do themselves. So yeah, I think one of the big releases of innovation in architecture is going to be in the things we don't know what to do, because you can build systems that run software and try the ideas out. Otherwise, you have to wait for Intel or ARM to figure it out. And they'll give you their solution, and that's all you'll be allowed to do if you're going to run a lot of software.
Okay, next question.
For UDC, should there be more than one of these open ISA?
Okay, so Tor asks, should there be, is there a good reason for there to be more than one open ISA?
No, I don't think so. I mean, first of all, it's a lot of work, right? Krista and Jensup and Lee and Andrew Waterman started this, and I said, don't do this. This is a bad idea. They said, oh, it'll just be 3 months. So it took 4 years. It took 4 years to do. I think there are a bunch of Unixes out there. There's free BSD, lots of BSDs, and then Linux kind of took off, right? And then the field rallied around it. I think one of these has to be successful. None of them have been successful yet. You could try to do it. There are other efforts besides ours right now. There's one that's based around the Hitachi SH. Is another one that's starting. So there's other people trying to do this. I think if this was to become a monopoly or something, and you couldn't influence what's going on, that'd be a good reason. But we don't even know that this is going to work yet. So I don't think the problem is there's not enough open instruction sets. Kind of the question is whether we can do this in hardware at all. Can we be as successful as LLVM or as Linux in the hardware? And that's an open question.
I tend to agree with the premise that one open source effort kind of makes sense. Although I disagree that it can cover everything you want to do. I don't know, do you have a GPU-oriented subset of it, various accelerators and whatnot?
Yeah, we have.
Is that the most efficient way to do a GPU?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, I'm not convinced. Like I said, certain accelerators, you're going to give the designers the freedom to do their own customized ISA. And I think an intermediate layer is a good approach to dealing with that.
Yeah, I think the question is, could you build a GPU, or we think you could build a GPU around RISC-V, but that's we haven't demonstrated that.
There's another question back there.
I'm Ziad Yusuf, I'm Ohio Northern. I guess the question is, would it be possible to have both an open ISA and proprietary ISA together and have the choice, just like we have in the software world?
Together in which way?
That we have, like in the software world, we have the option. I guess what I feel like is, why is it that we can't have the option that, okay, we can go with the proprietary one if we wanted to, and if we want the innovation in the research community, we can go with the open source and not
Yep.
Okay, so the question is why can't we have a choice between an open ISA and a proprietary ISA?
Okay, we promise not to drive Intel out of business. Yeah, I think,
But you notice Dave Christie didn't promise.
Yeah, right. I agree. Yeah, the question, in all these cases, I think in every case on my slide, there was a viable, money-making, proprietary one and an open one, right? Linux did not destroy all operating systems, right? Yeah, there's a company nearby who makes a lot of money selling operating systems. So, yeah, I think I agree with that. The experiment is to see if we can have an open one and the proprietary ones, which are absolutely not going to go away. They're not going to go away. But can it be viable there too?
Yeah, I see no reason why we can't all get along.
Trevor.
Trevor Mudd, University of Michigan. It doesn't take 6 months or a year to get up and running with it's more like 6 weeks.
Okay, so Trevor Mudge asserts that it doesn't take 6 months to get an ARM license.
Hey, can you guys
It's more like
look
6
up the
weeks.
paper? It's in the thing that was in
I'm
our.
not confident that I can tell you that.
I can tell you that the columnist whose name I can't present was invited to go there. They were trying to explain their business model. There's saying, not you, who has a sweetheart deal with ARM. You're talking about a company. They're talking about a company going to them. How long does it take them to sign a contract with ARM? I'm shocked by the numbers too. And he said,
Well,
based on this.
pick up the phone and talk to Ambit, but I know anything,
Right.
I've got anything.
All right, I'll take this. You want to put $100 down? Put $100 down, and we'll go read that paper and see what that
I'm
says.
not, this is just what some guy wrote down.
All right,
You want to call up.
ask Arm.
All right.
If Arm's here, we'll go ask him.
All right, we're not gonna settle this one here.
All right.
Gary Sohi.
The jury from Wisconsin. Technical question for you. So how do you deprecate something from an open ISA?
So the question that Gary Sohi has is how do you deprecate something from an open ISA?
So our model, kind of, what I expected the question is, how do you prevent, wretched excess like what's happening with x86 and ARM v7? So we're setting up, like other open source organizations, we're setting up a foundation. And I think of it as like, the Constitution of the United States, right? Is that, here, we're gonna, it gets seeded with these, these principles, right? Or these pieces of the Constitution, which are these instructions. And then we're gonna have a voting mechanism by the members of the foundation to amend it, right? And so we can add things to it and we can take things out, but it's gonna be like the US Congress and Senate, it's a slow changing system, right? So we're gonna have a mechanism in place with voting for members and things like that, how we add things or deprecate things. But it's gonna change slowly, and that's on purpose. For the areas we haven't defined, like transactional memory, there's a hole there, and once there's a proposal, that'll be different. But for the stuff that gets established, it'll probably be a slow changing thing. And so it's not, this is why I think it's not gonna, add 2 instructions a month, for 40 years. I think those parts will change slowly. The places that are brand new as they come along, those will pop up.
Do you have a mechanism for software discovery of features?
Software discovery of features?
Extensions?
We don't have anything like that, but that, I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, x86 architecture has a CPU ID instruction because it's feature flags.
Yeah. I see what you mean, yes, that's part of it, yeah. So that, for the things not implemented, detrapted can go to software, is that what you mean?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, that's part of it, but software just being able to query whether or not the feature is present.
Yes,
And
that's,
have fat binaries.
Andrew, it's there, right?
Yeah.
It's there.
Okay, other questions?
So,
Tom
Tom,
Lynch.
University of Michigan. So my personal experience of the quality of most open source software is it's sort of like driving a Yugo. Why should we expect the quality of this open source effort to really be competitive with what you can get?
What
Okay,
world?
Tom Winich asserts that open source software has dubious quality, and he wants to know why he would expect dubious quality from RISC.
Well, maybe that's because you think proprietary software has dubious quality, but ARM abandoned the ARM C compiler and endorsed the LLVM C compiler. That was an open source University of Illinois effort. I don't know if you use Apache web server, but I'd be surprised if you don't. This Postgres, a huge part of the software you use every day is open source. So I know there's lousy open source, but a lot, Amazon, the cloud computing is all open source. It's all open source effort. It's Google. Every time you do research, you use open source. So you're living in a different world than I'm living in. So I'll be happy that the quality I'd be thrilled if RISC-V cores are the same crappy quality as the software that Google runs to do searches.
Let's see, on the question of quality and verification, and this maybe gets to, maybe partly goes back to Andy's point about innovation and things kind of getting mired down in routine, and the heartbleed bug is open source code and open source, the idea of having all these eyes on correctness for open source being a good thing and working really well, but then you have the heartbleed bug. which was obviously a weakness. How would you like to have that casting hardware?
Yeah, fortunately, proprietary software has never had bugs. Yeah, Microsoft is really good. Yeah, look, the argument is more people looking at the design, more eyes on the design will help. It won't be, I guess if we had to build something that had 0 bugs, I don't think open source would do it. You know, if you try something with formal verification or something like that. But I think it's kind of common sense that, you know, reuse, sharing, you know, could well reduce the number of bugs that we do.
Okay, so we're about to enter our time. If you want to make a 1-minute statement, each of you, or you can pass. So why don't we go in reverse order of the introductions? So, Dave?
Yeah,
Dave's ambiguous.
This is a real possibility, right? I hope everybody in this room thinks this could happen, this could possibly happen. You know, like it's happened in all these other fields. And, you know, for it to happen, it's going to need people to volunteer. What was really great at our first workshop is, like I said, first of all, we kind of threw a party, and we didn't know if anyone would show up at the party, but 150 people showed up. A lot of people showed up from these companies, not representing their companies. This is a person who did validation for Qualcomm, and he was there, he took a vacation day to come, because he wanted to make this happen, he was going to contribute. So people in this room, you know, could help make this happen, and it would be a very exciting future. I can see a lot of positives coming out of that, making our research even more relevant. You know, we don't have to convince Intel or AMD to use our ideas. We can do it ourselves and put it out there, and people start using it. Right? So I see a very potentially exciting future, and it'll take volunteers to help make it happen. I hope some of you will consider joining us.
Okay. Dave Christie?
I think if you want to write a finalizer for HSAIL to target risk 5, the HSA Foundation would be happy to include it.
Okay?
Okay, so with that, we will finish our debate.